Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Life in the Red podcast. Luke Mullin and Amie Just, as usual. A lot to talk about today. We got some spring football updates, a lot of movement in the basketball transfer portal, a lot of different spring sports going on too, but mostly the weather's beautiful. I mean, I'm ready to get outside. What are we doing recording a podcast in here?
It's a little hot. I'm not used to the, roller coaster type weather. But yeah. And then, of course, it's going to be cold this weekend.
Yes.
Because, of course, it is. But yeah, it was good this morning for my run. So
excellent. Yeah, we've all been enjoying that too. It's a big change. You mentioned the roller coaster. I mean, our first open practice, it was like 30 degrees out there. I mean,
it
was
that.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Versus our last one, it's 50, 60, whatever. It's it's shorts. It's get out there and and get going, as opposed to the cold that these guys were dealing with. But as we're talking about spring camp, Thursday, by the way, Nebraska's 11th practice of the spring. So we're really kind of into the home stretch here. Things ramping up towards that red-white spring game. But they will practice again Saturday, probably a scrimmage in that one, as they usually do a week beforehand. And then again Tuesday, Thursday before that red-white game. And we heard a little bit from Matt Rule about maybe what that's going to look like. He didn't want to lock anything in, which you understand, with a few practices to go. But he mentioned, he hopes it's a true scrimmage, offense versus defense, and he's hoping that the quarterbacks will be live in it.
Yeah, of course, that it's going to, how it's going to work is, obviously deals with health, right? Like if you don't have enough guys to go, then okay. He's done the offense defense thing before, kind of like they did here previously.
Yep.
He doesn't want to do that, but if he has to, he has to. It's just going to depend on numbers. But yeah, the live quarterbacks will be interesting. Again, he didn't want to get himself into a corner, box himself in. But that's the plan as of right now, is to make those guys live, which we're gonna see what they're made of, I guess.
Definitely. Well, I mean, they've been talking about practice like you play, and I mean, if there's any example of that, it's the quarterbacks, because they want them to run. So.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Should be interesting. I hope they're live. I also hope no one gets hurt.
Yes.
I've been there. It was not live. It was 2016 spring game at KU. The starting quarterback got tackled weirdly, and he tore his ACL, MCL, and meniscus. And was out for the season. So you don't want that to happen.
Anything could happen in one play, one rep. So
yeah, but yeah, that's probably the worst thing I think I've seen in spring.
Yeah, that's pretty freaky for
a spring game.
Yeah, spring game.
Yeah,
definitely.
But I'm not putting it out there. It already happened.
Yep.
You just
years in the past.
Yeah.
We're recalling something here.
Yeah. So yeah, you just hope nobody gets hurt. But
certainly. Well, we've been looking at some of these different position groups, some of these different players, hearing from coaches. Of course, like I said, we've been at a couple practices. And one of the things that stood out to me, both from watching the coaches' demeanor and from what we've heard of them, is just how much they're focusing on some of the small details. There's really a big top-down focus on, hey, let's lock down some of these small things, because the coaches are really recognizing that they're throwing a lot at these players right now, and they're trying, I think, to break it down into small chunks, some of those small details and stuff.
Yeah, it's like learning a language, right?
Mm-hmm.
You start with your basics and you build from there. If you don't have your basics, you can't build. You've got nothing. So I think that's really important that they're starting small, honing in on the little stuff, because if you can't perfect that, you can't go anywhere.
Got to learn the alphabet before you learn the language.
Exactly.
And a few of these specific players that we want to touch on, we heard from the specialists a few days ago, Timmy Bleakroad, Brian Buschini, those returners there at kicker and punter, talking a lot about how they've enjoyed learning from Ed Foley, kind of the NFL perspective that he's brought to the team, obviously really experienced, both at college and the pros. And Brian Buschini, really cool, I think, tribute gesture that he made, changed his uniform number to number 18 in honor of Brooke Behringer.
Yeah, I was glad to hear his perspective on that.
Mm-hmm.
He said a little something earlier on social media about it, but you can tell it really means a lot to him. Obviously, he didn't meet Brooke. Brooke passed away probably before he was even alive. But he was just so moved by Brooks' faith and his commitment to the game and just everything who he was as a person, that he wanted to change his number to honor him. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, you can tell that Bushini, he's a really caring guy in general. So I think a lot of aspects there match up, and a great gesture from a guy who's a big leader as well, deserving, to wear a number and recognize a guy like that. So really cool to see for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like, that number is really special here. There's a couple pretty special numbers. And if you're going to wear it, it's good to know the people who came before you and to honor them with that.
Certainly. And on the defensive side of the ball, again, we heard from defensive coordinator Tony White today. We've heard a lot about the install, the learning aspect, the curve for this 3-3-5 defense. But one of the things that's most interesting to me is kind of the linebacker group, because we've heard this position, the jack linebacker, kind of a hybrid outside versus pass rusher kind of type. Which is kind of one of the more interesting things, because these linebackers are going to move all over in this defense. We kind of knew that, but Jamari Butler was working at that. MJ Sherman, also one of those guys in the mix. And Jamari Butler in particular, he was more of a pass rusher last year. So it's kind of interesting for me to see how the staff identifies these guys, regardless of what they were doing last year, and just saying, hey, as long as they train in this role for a couple months, they're going to fit what they want.
I mean, A.J. Rollins.
Yeah.
He looks the part.
Oh, definitely.
He looks the part. We haven't talked to him yet, obviously, but we've seen him walking around, seen him at practice. He's going to fit right in on defense for sure.
Certainly. And that linebacker group, some of the terminology, Mike, Will, these are the different spots. Mike kind of a middle linebacker type, Will kind of the weak side, coverage a little bit more. So still a lot to be decided. Nick Henrik not practicing this spring. So who fills those exact roles? Plenty of time to figure that out. But, we've been watching where these guys have been working with in practice, and, things can be jumbled. But one of the more interesting things I saw, Blaze Gunnarsson was working with the interior defensive lineman on Tuesday, which is interesting because he was a D lineman, edge rusher type last year. But staff clearly identified they think that he can fill one of those perhaps down lineman roles.
I think that could work. I really do. Obviously, it's early. It's so early, right? And he's learning, but that could really work. Especially they don't have a whole lot of numbers there.
Yeah.
So that position change, if it is a true position change, could be beneficial for everybody involved.
Yeah, he's athletic, probably a little bit smaller. When you have him standing up there, to Stephon Wynn and Nash Hutmaker, he looks a little bit smaller, but definitely I agree with you too. I think as long as he gets some of that interior technique down, it'd be really interesting to see his potential as a little bit different, body type than what they see a lot of those linemen up front.
Yeah, but strength is strength.
Definitely. So. And while we're talking about these linemen, Matt Rule really impressed with a couple of the early enrollees. He mentioned Cam Lenhart, Prince Will Umanmielen, both kind of working with the ones a little bit. And again, they've been mixing guys in. Don't read, too much into the depth chart or whatever, groups or teams that they're working with here. But that's high praise from a head coach for having those two guys kind of come in, hold their own against veterans there. And he also mentioned Maverick Noonan, Elkhorn South grad. He's been doing well as a pass rusher. And Gunnar Katula here from Lincoln Southeast, working at left tackle, which is a really, really tough position for anybody, let alone a early enrollee freshman to come in and compete right away.
Yeah, whew. That's a tough ask. That's a tough ask, but, you've got to be ready at some point, so why not start now?
Yeah, and I would just say kind of the physical stature of these different players like Lenhart and Prince Will, they very much look like college guys. Gatula also, I mean, he looks like a tackle. I mean, it's a position that obviously he played for Lincoln Southeast for a few years, but the body type, the demands for a college left tackle are a little bit different. But he's moving very well in the drills that we've seen so far. So I agree with Rule's estimation. And by the way, the other early enrollees, Kai Wallen, Sincere Safala, and Dwight Boodle, those last two defensive backs. Boodle finally cleared for full practice a couple days ago. So those guys have been working as well. And one of the more bigger picture things I wanted to touch on, you wrote a column about it, was real kind of talking about the need for confidence in this team. We've heard a few like bits and blurbs. He talked about the offensive line, kind of similar thought, but it's kind of interesting to hear from the head coach talking about how much these guys need confidence.
Yeah, and in my column, I wrote that, Rule's comments are not surprising because we heard the same sort of thing last season from, Mickey Joseph and, other, members of the coaching staff, Mark Whipple, very much so Mark Whipple. He did not shy away from how he felt about anything. And so to me, it wasn't surprising to hear those comments from Matt about confidence. But yeah, it's definitely something that they need to work on, right? Because when you're down 24-7, 14-3, like early in a game, like, are you gonna let that just let you not, come back, or are you gonna laugh in the face of it and work to get better? Like, you need to believe in yourself, and that's just, I think, the message that he wants to get across to them is like, you have to believe in yourself even when you're down 24-14. You can't shoot yourself in the foot with your confidence, right? And so, yeah, it was really interesting to hear him wax poetic about that for several minutes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because you wouldn't generally say that's his style. He's kind of said, oh, I don't want to be a, rah-rah, like cheerleader type, but clearly I think, he's a relationships person, and he knows that instilling that confidence, yeah, you can do it a little bit one-on-one, your assistant coaches, but still you need to see the head coach out there saying, hey, I believe in you. I believe in this position group. I believe in this team. Yeah,
and for me, like, Matt sees the potential in so many of these players. Like Bryce Bernhardt, he said, I think he's, an NFL, like, talent. Like, I think he can really get there, but does he believe in himself? And then he was quick to point out, it's not just Bryce, it's everyone.
Yep.
And yeah, that was really interesting to me.
Certainly. And one other quick note, wide receiver room. We heard from Garrett McGuire a couple days ago. He had mentioned before kind of his snacks tactic, get the guys in to get some film study by having some snacks out, ready for them. But one tidbit that I thought was really interesting, glad that he shared it, was that he lets some of the veterans like Josh Fleeks, Billy Kemp are the two guys that he mentioned. He lets them kind of get up in his chair, run through some of that film study. And he mentioned that's a powerful thing for the guys in the room when they're being taught by their teammates. And it's a very collaborative approach to learning. Really interesting to, a lot has been made, he's young, he's inexperienced, whatever. But that's a very emotionally intelligent move, I would say, by recognizing that these guys are going to learn well from each other.
Yeah, let leaders lead. I think that's a great example of that. Even if there are honey buns involved.
That's sounding good. Hey. let's get some film study. But moving on to want to touch on some recruiting as well. There's been some updates to get through. Recently, Matt Rule released his summer camp schedule. Friday Night Lights camp that will return, as well as a specialist camp and a fullback camp.
Let's go.
The fullback, a whole day of learning for the fullbacks of the world.
That is so Nebraska.
Yes,
I love it.
Get the neck pads out there. Let's get ready for it.
Let's go.
And first 2024 in-state commit also on the board for Nebraska. Elkhorn South's Ashton Murphy, a guy who plays both offensive and defensive line for the Storm, but a lot of attention from defensive line coach Terrence Knighton. They see him coming in at defensive end right away, and talked to him yesterday. Really impressed. Seems like a really intelligent player, and plus he told me he wants to get into mechanical engineering, and I'm like, okay, well that's that'll go over my head. So I don't even know what you're doing there, man.
I mean, linemen can be very, very
Absolutely.
smart. Very smart.
Yes.
And so that's not surprising to me that a lineman wants to go into a very challenging field. But best wishes. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's so hard.
A lot on top of being a football player, dealing with all that coursework.
Yeah.
But anyway, he mentioned how when he's playing defense, he really likes to see how the play is developing, how the space is going. Like, those are the types of things that goes through his head, which is really, really good and good to hear. He's eager to learn, putting on some weight in the weight room. And again, first in-state commit for the 2024 class for the Huskers, which, coming off that big junior day, a few of those targets made their college choices, and a few of them going to Big Ten rivals. Rockhurst, Kansas City offensive lineman Andrew Sprague was a big target for the Huskers. He committed to Michigan, was up there, had a good visit with Michigan and pulled the trigger there, deciding to go to the Wolverines. Sioux Falls, South Dakota linebacker Thomas Heiberger, he committed to Wisconsin. Fort Collins, Colorado offensive lineman Gage Ginter committed to Tennessee. And Kindred, North Dakota lineman Riley Sunrum, he's going to Minnesota. So all those guys, they're part of the targets, but hey, they had these other options. This is still early in the process. They decided to commit elsewhere. So just a couple updates for that. Quieter weekend coming up on campus. A lot of recruits will be back for the spring game. So that's kind of your quick recruiting update as things are. But I think really interesting, we want to get into this. The transfer portal for men's and women's basketball has been open, a lot of movement. And in particular, the women's team, no transfers in yet, but a huge announcement from Jazz Shelley. She's coming back for year 5.
Yeah, that's going to help them a ton.
Oh, absolutely.
You lose so much talent already with Izzy Bourne deciding to not use her 5th year. And then, Sam Hybe, she has no more eligibility, so she can't come back. So that's going to boost them a ton. You wonder how she's going to change her game. Is she's going to score more? Because they need that.
Yep.
They need a more reliable scorer. She could do it. It's just, does she want to? Because she's so selfless. Like, I think she'd rather have 10 assists than 25 points.
Definitely.
But yeah, so that's gonna be huge for them. She's just an irreplaceable talent, and having her for one more year is definitely going to give them the boost that they need.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the scoring too, because if she decided to move on, yes, there are still quite a few returning contributors, but you look at her and you say that that's a dominant scorer. That's somebody, fourth quarter, game on the line, game-winning shot. That's somebody you want the ball in her hands. So having her back is a great luxury to have that leader, experienced guard back for sure.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And while we're on the topic of Australians, a new signing officially signed. I think she was committed for a couple months, but Jessica Petrie coming over from Australia. She had some experience, playing for the Australian youth international teams. Really good scorer down there as well. Joining the program, she's a forward, by the way. 6'2", played semi-professional basketball there. Averaged 18 points and 8.8 rebounds per game. So continuing that Australian connection and adding potentially a big contributor for next year.
Yeah, I think obviously there's a long way to go before we can pencil in people for places, but I feel like that she could be a potential replacement for what Izzy Bourne has, been giving this team. Obviously she's not Izzy, right? But she could grow into that, which would be cool.
Certainly. And how good the scouting is down there. Clearly they have identified her as a player of interest. So we'll see how things shake out, but officially on her way to Nebraska, signed and ready. And in other news, a little bit of a coaching update. One of the veteran assistants from the team, Tom Gailey, retiring from coaching, pursuing mission work, and coached here for a long time. Been part of Amy Williams' staff, I think, for pretty much the entire time, and I'm sure he'll be missed amongst all those players and the other assistant coaches. Yeah,
so it's a huge loss. Like, you just go through the quote tweets of Nebraska's announcement today, and you've got every player that has played here over the last 7 years, and they're all singing his praises. It's a huge loss. Like, he's been here for the past 7 years, has coached with Amy for 8 years, but he's been a coach for 30.
Yeah.
And it's time for him to do charitable work elsewhere, is what the announcement said. So wish him the best. He was always great to deal with from my perspective. Obviously didn't know him very long because I haven't been back very long, but he was always really nice. and it's definitely going to be a big hole for them to fill.
Yeah, certainly. So one more thing for Amie Williams to do in her off-season to-do list, that will be to fill that vacancy versus moving over to the men's team. They had a lot on their to-do list. We knew it was going to be a busy, active transfer portal season, and already seeing the first kind of tangible progress. 2 commits coming on the same day. Let's start with Charlotte guard Bryce Williams. Visited the team last weekend, committed on Wednesday. Caught a little bit of him in the
today.
CBI. Yeah.
He signed today. They made it
That's
official.
quick.
Yes, they did.
But I caught a little bit of him in the CBI. Had a really great tournament. Solid scorer, 6'7", pretty big for a guard. Good size, good ball handling. Those are just kind of my initial impressions, but should be a big addition there at guard.
Yeah, they still need like a point guard.
Yep.
Like he's more of like a 2-3
combo
type
yep.
guy. But they also need that because you don't have Sam Griesel. So you need to replace him there, and we'll see how he fits.
Certainly. And he had a lot of other teams interested in him. Not sure how many other visits he ended up going on, but there's a lot of interest in him, again, after a really strong season, a really good postseason performance. And how about the other commit, too? 2 in one day, as I said. Bradley Bigman Rinkmast, 6'10" senior from the Netherlands, was first team All-Missouri Valley Conference selection last year. And that was also a huge need there to bring in an inexperienced big man in a league that has a lot of those.
Yeah. And if you're a big, why wouldn't you want to play for Fred Hoiberg? Like,
for sure.
He's really great with posts and big forward, power forward type guys. So, yeah, I'll be interested to see how Mast comes into the fold. But yeah, he had an offer from Iowa, but decided to come here instead. So Husker fans should love hearing that.
Certainly, and I'm glad you mentioned kind of Hoiberg's track record with big men, because Mast, he was saying that he's heard that about him. He said he watched Derek Walker play. You know, he turned on the tape, said he liked what he saw, and said, hey, maybe I could fill in that role, which is exactly what you want to see from the players, that they've thought about that. They've thought about how they're going to fit in the system, how they're going to get better. And by the way, he also has a 33% three-point percentage in his career for big man. Not bad.
Yeah, not too shabby. Well, the Euro game is a little different.
Oh, yes. Good point.
A little different.
And that's not it. A lot of other transfer portal targets. Nebraska's still going after quite a few. Our colleague Sam McEwen from the World Herald reported that Fred Hoiberg and Nate Lesnar were out visiting Gonzaga transfer Hunter Salas on Sunday, a former 5-star recruit out of Millard North. Kind of had a reserve or backup role for Gonzaga, a good guard, working on some of his playmaking ability, but probably wants a bigger role. That's why he entered the transfer portal. A lot of teams will be after him, including Nebraska, so it'll be very interesting to see. I watched him. He's put up some big performances at Pinnacle Bank Arena already, so that I will be very interested to see how this recruitment process in the transfer portal goes for him.
Selfishly, I think it would be really cool if he came back.
Absolutely. I remember, just on a side note, I went to a Millard North high school game, at their own gym when he was a senior there. And the way that he dunked, I mean, he was like jumping over the rim. I mean, his hops for the high school level were just incredible to watch. And to see that part of that has, still remained at Gonzaga, but you kind of want to see him in that free-flowing role. I'll just be excited to see wherever he ends up and see him continue growing and, as a player and a scorer perhaps. So
yeah, it'd be cool.
And the other guys also on Nebraska's radar, Siena guard Javian McCollum, 17-point-per-game scorer last year, set to visit Nebraska this weekend, and Pittsburgh center John Hewley will be in Lincoln in the next week or two, averaged 14.8 points, 7.9 rebounds per game for Pitt 2 years ago. So two of those guys also on Nebraska's radar.
Yeah, they need a point guard.
Yeah.
And then they need to figure out what Casey Tominaga is going to do. that is lost in all of
Yes,
this.
good point.
Because he has not announced what he's going to do one way or the other. It really wouldn't surprise me if he enters his name into the pool to test the waters for the NBA draft while retaining his eligibility. That wouldn't surprise me at all, just to get some feedback from scouts. Maybe he's invited to the G League Combine, get some more just feedback there. It really wouldn't surprise me. I'm not going to say that's happening, but it wouldn't surprise me because I think he's at a stage where he needs all of the feedback possible, and that needs to be feedback from people who aren't necessarily invested in his personal best interests. Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, if he does do that, that kicks the can down a little bit longer. So
yeah, great point, because that'll impact the players that they're maybe looking after in the transfer portal. Also, how many scholarships you have too.
Yep.
So a couple of considerations there for when he eventually makes that decision.
Yeah. Yep.
And a few other updates. Want to move on to some of the other Nebraska sports. In volleyball, shout out to the 2,000 plus Central City residents who sold out the spring scrimmage in under an hour. Some of them camped overnight at the school. They had a whole setup for people to get in line. Really impressive. And by the way, they built a great new facility out there at Central City. They call it the Bison Dome. A nice gym there for their basketball, volleyball teams. And it'll be packed to the brim there for the spring scrimmage this season.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to going there and just talking with all the people who get the awesome opportunity to watch the scrimmage. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, really cool tradition, by the way, from John Cook, taking that on the road every year, going to different spots in Nebraska. A really cool, connects with the community is always a great tradition that they look forward to.
Yeah, yeah. I wish they could do more than just one.
Right.
Right? Knock off
They
a
could
couple
do a whole
places.
series. Yeah, go to 3 or 4.
Yeah, it'd be cool. But, of course, you can only do one. So, but yeah, no, sold out in like 52 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Really impressive.
Because you could only buy tickets in person. You couldn't buy them online anywhere. It wasn't through the University of Nebraska. It was through the box office at Central City, and you had to be there to buy them in person. And they started at 8 a.m., and people were there at 8 p.m.
Yep.
Nebraska fans.
It's an event.
Never underestimate the dedication of a Nebraska fan. Just saying.
Certainly. And an update for the track and field teams. Both the women's and the men's team made their season debut in the outdoor top 25 rankings on Monday. Husker men are positioned at number 6 in the nation. The women in at number 15. Both are the highest ranked Big Ten programs. Mentioned a couple times, Justin St. Clair doing a great job with that team. They had a couple meets, but big ones here coming up in May. So we'll keep an eye on them, and doing very well nationally so far. That's the quick update for them. And softball won 2 of 3 games over Maryland, their most recent series. Allowed just 2 runs all series. Sarah Harness and Courtney Wallace combined for a pair of shutouts. Of course, Nebraska got shut out in the game that they lost, so that's how that one went the other way. But we know how good those 2 pitchers are, but really a strong performance from them. And this one, big one coming up this weekend, 3-game series up at Indiana. Our last podcast, I mentioned that they had a 20-plus game winning streak. Well, maybe I jinxed it a little bit because that did get snapped since our last podcast, but still one of the strongest teams in the Big Ten, a potential postseason team there in Indiana. So big series for Nebraska softball.
Yeah, that would be good to steal 1 or 2 of those for Nebraska, so they could help their postseason chances as well.
Certainly. And on to baseball, good performance there up in Michigan. Won 2 of 3 over the Wolverines. Won the series. Emmett Olson throwing a real gem there on Friday. Team fell behind on Saturday, could never rally. And then a great hitting performance there on Sunday. Got to give a shout out to a bullpen, too, that's been a little up and down. They've had some great stretches, and this was one of them. Just 2 runs in 14 2/3 innings of relief work in that series. That's gonna win you a series against pretty much everybody, so long as your starters, aren't getting knocked out of the game in the first or second inning. So really impressive from them. But on the flip side, they have kind of struggled in these midweek games. That continued 6-5 loss. It is a walk-off. Omaha beating Nebraska on its home field there.
In extras.
Yeah, on Tuesday.
Painful.
Pretty rough.
Especially after how Nebraska rallied.
Yep. Down 4-0 early, came back. Yeah, it's a gut punch for sure.
Yeah, because you thought maybe the tide was turning, top of the ninth. Omaha left 3 runners on base. You were down by 1. They tied it up, forced it, and then walk off. Just a gut punch.
Definitely. And that's 2-0 for Omaha against Nebraska so far this season. So not a lot of in-state wins for the Huskers so far, but when they are dropping some of these Tuesday midweek games, it really brings up the importance of the weekend series. And in particular, don't want to put too much pressure, but coming out of this one with a sweep would be really important. Northwestern, the worst Big Ten team so far this year at 5-22. A lot of drama happened early in the year. They fired, or a couple members of their coaching staff left. 6 games into the year, I believe they've been replaced with volunteers or local coaches who are helping out. But Northwestern, by the way, did win 2 of 3 against Illinois, same as Nebraska. So they've been doing pretty well in conference play. 3 of their 5 wins have come against Big Ten teams, but really going to be important for Nebraska. If you lose 1, 2, or whatever it is, their RPI is going to drop a lot. So really important for them to stay strong and potentially come away with the series sweep.
Yeah. If they lose 2, tank. Their RPI will tank.
Definitely.
You can't lose to Northwestern. But we said that for football season last year too. So you never know what's going to happen. That's why they play the games.
Anything can happen in sports. Anything can definitely happen in baseball. So yeah, just like you said, we will see how things turn out. Make sure to stay tuned. JournalStar.com for all the updates, for all that baseball, softball, anything else happening this weekend. Amy will have a couple interesting stories for you as well, some different updates to come from football. But I think that's all we got today. As I mentioned, Red-White spring game coming up, more practice updates to come this next week. That's all we've got for today's Life in the Red. Appreciate all of you tuning in. We'll see you next week.